Hello everyone, this is Joy with scrapbooknerd.com. Today I'm here with a special video for a post on our Scrapbook Nerd friends and fan group on Facebook. One of our friends had posted a question about how to get some drippage or paint splotches onto her layout or projects. So Judith, this video is for you. We're going to start with some water, some acrylic paint, or some mist. And I even have a stencil here that has some splotches or paint splatters from Crafter's Workshop, and it has a 12 by 12 or 6 by 6 stencil. I created this layout here with this kind of watercolor splotchy background using some dilutions mists and the packaging technique with an old package, product package or a Ziploc bag. I'm going to tell you first off that this is a unprimed, non-gessoed surface, and this other paper I brought in here is a gessoed surface. So gesso is a primer for a porous surface to allow the mediums you're going to add on top to sit on top and flow nicely across the paper. It creates a barrier between the paper and the medium that you're using, so it is able to flow and sit on top of the gesso as compared to a dry piece of paper, which with this packaging technique, when we add it to it, it is going to absorb into the paper because it is a porous surface. So old packaging or a Ziploc bag works perfectly fine, and all you need to do is get your mist onto the package in some way. You can pour some on, you can use the tip here to put some on. When pouring it on, be careful because you can get too much, and the more you put on the package, the harder it is to flip this package over onto your paper. So we're going to start with the plain white cardstock here, and I'm going to start by adding a little bit of water to the surface. Just a little bit, not too much. I think I just 2 sprays. This will help a little bit in getting the ink to manipulate on the surface. So I'm pressing it down and lifting up the package as I move around the page. You can drag it if you want to. So you'll see that this gets a good effect, but what happens is that it absorbs right into the paper. So we're not getting any movement around the page. Once it goes onto the paper, it absorbs right into the fibers of the paper. So I am going to spray it again, and we're not going to be able to get it to move around the page. So if your goal is to get some drippage, this might not be the way to go, and this is one downfall of using non-primed paper. So we're going to go and get the other paper here, clean up my surface a little bit. So this has been, the gesso was put down and allowed to dry. This is way too much ink. I'm going to absorb some of it up, and actually I should have taken a little bit more off because as you'll see when I flip this over, it's going to roll off the packaging as I flip it over. So even though this happens, we can still work with it. I'm moving it around with the package up and down, and I did drag it a little bit on there. And as you can see, it's not absorbing into the paper right away because of that gesso. So it's still wet, and you can see that if I turn the paper side to side, I can manipulate those drips to go in the way that I want them to. You can tap the side of your paper, tap it on your desk to get the mist to roll downwards. You can even add more water to it and to get those drips moving a little bit better and flow a little more easily. So gesso does help you get that watercolor or painterly look when you use it on your cardstock to prime the surface to make it non-porous so your mist sits on top. Both look great, they just work differently. So let's take a look at that layout again. I created this layout using that packaging technique and applied gesso to the left side of the page and used some texture paste in the background, and then used the packaging technique with a different color of mist, and that's how you can get some of this paint splotches or splatters, as you would like to call them. So let's start working with some acrylic paint here. This is Dina Wakley's heavy bodied acrylic, but any paint will work, even craft paint. I'm going to mix in some water here on this piece of plastic into the paint in order to get it to flow on the paper. So I'm going to grab a brush, and I'm just using this flathead brush. This is a very cheap paint brush. It doesn't matter what type you use. Some people like to use a round brush, but in this case I'm just going to use this flathead, as I'm just going to be getting some drippage from the top of this paper. So mixing in the water to break down that paint and make it a little more watery. In doing so, you are breaking down some of the pigment that has been added, and so it will be dry a lighter color in some spots. So all I'm going to do is pick up some of this watery paint and drag it across the top of the page, and because I'm adding so much, it's going to start dripping down the page. This is one way to add some drip marks to your project if you want. You can do this from any side of the paper, obviously, and as long as you add enough water, you can then use the same thing that I showed you in the last video, which is to tap the sides of the paper or tap the paper onto your desk to help you get those drip marks moving. I'm going to show you also in this portion of the video what it looks like to do splatter with acrylic paint using the two brushes that you see here on my desk. So I'm going to pick up this fan brush, and I'm going to pick up some of the watered down paint, and you can add this to a project anytime. So I'm picking up, and I'm going to use the fan brush to flick paint splatters onto the paper. There's a couple ways you can do it, and you can see here that this is a very fine splattering of paint. So the type of brush you use or how dense the bristles are will create a different splatter effect. So sometimes you might want big droplets, and sometimes you might want some small ones, and I just wanted to show you different brushes can do that for you. Okay, so let's move into the fourth way to get some splotches onto your projects. This is a Crafter's Workshop template that I showed you in the beginning of the video. I happen to have some black archival ink here with my ink blending foam, and I'm just going to rub the ink blending foam with some ink on over top of the stencil. This is an easy, very controlled way to add some ink looking splotches to your project. This is going, depending on how much ink you add, it could look kind of ghosted, if that makes sense to you. It's a lighter version of the ink. I'm going to add some acrylic paint now to a makeup sponge, and I'm going to dab off some of the excess. Sorry, that's off camera here. You don't want your makeup sponge to, or whatever you're using to apply the paint, to be overloaded, because it can get underneath the stencil. So I'm just going to pounce up and down with the dry makeup sponge to add some of the paint splotches from the stencil, and I'll lift it up so you can see the difference between the two applications. So here the ink is a lighter version of the ink, again just depending on how much you have, and the paint, because it's just a different medium, it's a little more creamy, and I don't have to rub it in, it's sitting on top of the surface of the paper, and so it's a a bolder color and a bolder look than the ink being rubbed into the paper. So the last thing I'm going to show you today is just using the nozzle of the mist bottle to flick some of the mist onto your projects. I'm just tapping the nozzle with my finger. This is the paper that we added some of the mist to before, and as you can see, you can go back in and add these splotches and it will be darker than the previous application. So you can come in and add more layers as you want. You can even come back in and do the same packaging technique again with another color or with the mist again, just by flicking it, and you'll be able to get different tones of the same ink on your project. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Quick Tips for Paper Crafters. I also wanted to thank Judith for posting the question in the scrapbooknerd.com friends and fan page on Facebook. Take care, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.